Hello, everybody. I'm not going to use a mic, so hopefully you can hear me okay. If not, just give me a little thumbs up and I will talk louder. So first of all, thank you for coming out tonight. The weather isn't probably the most ideal conditions, but compared to what it looked like the forecast a couple days ago, we're thankful that it turned out as well as it did. My name is Dawn Campbell. I'm one of the supervisors at St. Croix County in our Children's Services Division. And so we have been working on this opportunity to hear a really inspiring story for quite a while now. So we appreciate you taking the time to come out. I didn't, but a colleague of mine first heard Gaelin speak at a Somerset High School event. And we partnered with Gaelin and somehow knew that we were kind of destined to come together. He's a support of the foster care system, which you're going to hear about. He has a really inspiring story. And so we have been working with him to our goal is to bring information, hopefully inspire some of you to support kids in foster care through fostering or being a respite provider. We're going to talk about that a little later after Gaelin's presentation. Couple logistic things. Bathrooms are just around the corner to the right. If you need to step out, please do so. Afterward, we're going to have time to kind of mingle or have some cookies. If you have questions, we can answer those for you. Just a little history about St. Croix County and our foster care situation and why we're doing this, why we needed you to come and hear our message. We have probably the highest number of kids in out-of-home care that we've ever had. I can probably safely say in the history of children's services. Currently, we have about 100 kids that are placed in out-of-home care. Some of those children are in relative homes. Some of those children are in our licensed county foster homes. And if you think, maybe that number shocks you, maybe it doesn't. 5 years ago, that number would have been around, maybe at a high point, 70 kids. 8 years ago, that number would have been about 40. So in the last 7-8 years, we've just seen a drastic increase due to a lot of different reasons for kids that need the support of homes. So we're hoping that Gaelin's message is going to inspire some of you to want to help in some way or in a different capacity. And we're going to talk about what some of those opportunities might look like when we get done. I also want to just send a shout out. You'll see some people wearing t-shirts. We have, if you see someone in a t-shirt, they're probably a foster parent, a current foster parent of ours, maybe someone on our recruitment and retention team. We have partnered with United Way and our foster care recruitment and retention team. We partnered together to organize this. So I asked Gaelin if he wanted me to read a formal bio about himself. He didn't. And after you hear him speak, you'll realize what a humble person he is. And so it'll make sense why he didn't want a real formal introduction. So I'm going to turn it over to him and sit back and enjoy.
The reason I didn't want Dawn to read anything formal is because it's really weird to listen to someone talk about you before you go up and talk about you. So I've learned that the hard way of not wanting anything formally to be read because it's not about you guys. It's more uncomfortable for me. I'm thinking selfishly there. So this is uniquely special, I would say. I do this. I speak. I get a chance to travel and talk to different people who might serve youth and children and vulnerable populations that overlap with parts of my story. But I don't always get to do this in communities that I grew up in. And I identify as a Western Wisconsin boy, right? So I went to middle school for a year in Hudson, Wisconsin. I graduated from Somerset High School. As I was driving into New Richmond today, I was just listening to some music and I found myself starting to get a little amped up. And it's because I was driving on the same roads that we used to drive on the school bus in Somerset to come play New Richmond, who we did not like. So I apologize if I'm a little excited to be here tonight because my brain, I feel like I'm getting ready to play a football game. I actually emailed Dawn today and told her, I was like, it's game day, let's go. So I get a chance, you might see this on the shirts, but I truly believe in this idea of belonging. I believe it's something that drives each and every one of us. I know for a fact it was something that drastically changed my life for the better. And so if I can achieve one thing tonight through my work, through my life, if I can achieve one thing, I want people to understand the important fundamental aspect of belonging for everybody and the unique barriers and deficits that children that have to navigate the foster care system face when it comes to those things. And so I want to start with a quick question. And it's more of it's a rhetorical one, so don't put yourself out there and be wrong. We got River Channel back there, so you're going to be on TV at some point being wrong. But it's how many thoughts do you think, how many decisions do we make in one day, 24-hour period? And so I want you to think about that. I told you, don't put yourself out there. I'm going to tell you the answer. The answer is we make 35,000 decisions in one day. Now, do you think we make all of those decisions consciously? Absolutely not. If we did that, if we had to make 35,000 decisions in one day, we'd lose our mind. Now, if you are a parent of young children, you might answer 35,000 questions in one day, and you're probably pretty close to losing your mind. I'm speaking from experience here. We have 2 littles at home, but we have to make 35,000 decisions in one day. That's around 2,000 per hour don't check my math here, if you get 7 hours of sleep on average. So, and again, if you're a parent of young children, you're not getting 7 hours. I'll tell you that. So if you're an average person and you get 7 hours of sleep at night, you are roughly making 2,000 decisions per hour. And that goes to basically 1 every 2 seconds. Now, our brain's primary role in our life, in day-to-day life for each and every one of us, its goal is to help us survive. If you want to oversimplify everything we do, every decision we make, everything we have to navigate throughout a day, our brain's job is to help us survive. And so in order to do that, in order to make all these conscious decisions, our brain has to go or make decisions based on prior experiences. It has to make decisions based on memories or things you've experienced in the past. It has to make decisions off of bias, off of a lot of different things. But primarily, our brain answers and filters decisions through something called belonging. We are constantly asking ourselves, every single person, regardless of your home life, your experience, how old you are right now, we are constantly asking ourselves the question subconsciously, am I safe and do I fit in? Another way to say, do I fit in, is, am I loved? We are constantly asking those questions. But as we talk about the real reason why we're here, which is to better serve community that overlaps with foster care, to better serve the youth that have to navigate that, and better serve the adults that are also navigating it, we have to acknowledge that belonging is not as accessible to them. It is not as available, because the top 3 sources for youth across the board to experience belonging are family, school, and community. Family, school, and community, in that order. Now, if we are talking specifically about foster youth, statistically, they are way more exposed to have those 3 communities or points of relationship fractured immediately. If I'm in foster care, I do not have a normal relationship with my family. If I'm in foster care, I'm 4 times as likely to go to a different school every other year. If I'm in foster care for more than 2 years, I'm probably going to stay in at least 4 homes. So we have to acknowledge, if we have this conversation and we understand and believe that belonging is important and vital to our development, we have to understand that foster youth and the foster community is at a deficit. They're at a gap. They have a gap that they have to overcome, to transcend in order to reach their full potential. And the reason I'm talking about this specifically, the reason I feel like I can uniquely be on this stage talking about it, is because I wouldn't be here if it were not for belonging. I wouldn't be the person that I am. I wouldn't be able to talk to you about these things. I wouldn't have a connection to this community, at least not a positive one, if it were not for belonging. But I want to tell you a story, before I tell you a story, these are the 3 kind of points of belonging according to the scientific definition. It is first a yearning for connection. So the reason they talk about a yearning for connection is because it acknowledges that it is not a conscious decision. We don't yearn for things that we consciously think about. Neuroscientists have found out that belonging is used by the same neural networks as thirst and hunger. So the same way that our body tells us that we're thirsty, tells us that we're hungry, our body tells us that we are yearning for connection, that we have this unmet need to belong. The same way. So the reason, or the way that I explain this to people all the time is, and maybe it doesn't apply in Western Wisconsin, but it applies to my wife. And this is why I use the example, because my wife would love for me to believe that she yearns to go to Target. But no, she makes a conscious decision to go there. Now, there's an aspect of maybe she goes to Target because she feels like she belongs, but it's not a reason to just go. It's not a subconscious decision. She makes a conscious one to go there. But when we're talking about belonging, when we're talking about our subconscious decisions that we make, belonging is something that our body is telling us and driving us to pursue and to try to obtain. The second one is need for positive regard. Every single human, every single person needs to know that there's someone out there that cares what happens to them. Every single person needs to know that someone's going to be looking for them if they are not where they are supposed to be at any given point in time. Now, for foster children, for me, from my experience, there were many times in my life where I didn't have a curfew, where no one cared if I didn't show up at school that day or missed a practice. There are so many ways throughout life that I didn't have this met need for positive regard. I felt as though it was indifferent what happened to me. It was indifferent what I experienced or what I navigated. And so that brings us to the third one, the desire for personal connection. Every single human has a desire to be connected on an intimate level with at least one other individual. So there's something about each and every one of us in here that want to be intimately known so that we don't have to explain all 35,000 of our decisions every single day. If I have to explain to you why I make the jokes that I do, or that I like my cereal in the bowl before you pour the milk into it, I'm going to start to lose my mind. I'm going to start to feel as though I'm not known or understood or I don't belong here. And so these are the three ways that they scientifically describe belonging. And if we want to simplify those things, it comes down to these three words. Every single person, in order to belong, they need to feel like they're important, that they matter, and that they have value. Every single person in this room can think about times where they felt these three things in life and in relationship. And I'm willing to bet that you can also think about times in your life where you lacked all three. We are talking about a population of foster youth that do not have access to these three things in the same rate as their peers. And yet we still expect them to care. We still expect them to be as invested or focus on the future as much as the next person. And so I want to tell you about a story from my first football practice. I was an athlete, and yes, that handsome devil is me. But I want to tell you about one of my first football practices because of, well, one, football played a big role in my life, played a very big role in my life, but also I remember this story that I'm about to share happening and how it changed my perspective in my relationship with the game of football from that point. So I was in sixth grade. It was my first day ever playing football. I had been in a foster home up until that point for almost all my childhood, well, from 5 until 11. I was in a foster home that wouldn't allow me to play sports. So this is the first time I'm on a team. I dreamt about this day. I watched every single football movie, show, highlight that I possibly could to get ready for my big day. That first practice was my first game day. And so I laid out my practice uniform before practice, like I was getting ready to go to prom or something. And I showed up to practice really excited, but also really anxious and nervous. And so the first part of practice went pretty smoothly. I didn't stick out like a sore thumb, so I wasn't getting yelled at by my coaches like some of the other kids, losers. I was enjoying it. I was feeling like I belonged in a lot of ways, which was a big question that I had going into it. Am I even good at football, right? Because I can play well at recess, but if I go on the actual team and I'm not very good or I'm going to ride the bench, then what does it matter? And so at the end of our first practice, we were doing this drill called the Oklahoma drill. And if you're not familiar with football, that's totally okay. I'm going to judge you later, not right now. But if you're not familiar with football, it is like the cliche football drill. Like if you've ever watched a show or a movie, Friday Night Lights or anything like that, you've seen this drill in that show. It's a drill about toughness. It's a drill about physicality. And so normally it's one-on-one and you kind of lay on your back or you get down in your stance and they say go, and it's who can hit the hardest and who can knock who the furthest back. But for this drill, maybe it was because I was a big kid and I was one of the biggest kids on the team. And I know that's hard to believe now looking at me. I'm a pretty small person, but I had to go against two kids. And so as I got up to the front of the line, my coach, I remember him saying, Elmore, get up here. And he called me by my last name, not because it was a cool nickname, but I don't think he knew how to say my first name. So I went up there to the front of the line. I get down in my stance, and right before we go, I look back at my coach and I'm like, Coach, what's the snap count? And the snap count is basically the rhythm that the offense moves in a drill or in a game. So down said hut. That's when the ball goes, that's when everything goes. But if you're on defense, you're not privy to the information of the snap count. And I was on defense in this drill. Because I was naive, I asked my coach, what's the snap count? And he told me it's on 2. So I got down on my stance, got ready, and I thought to myself, I was like, Gaelin, don't be that kid that messes up the drill. Like, I know you're excited, I'm trying to talk myself off of my nerves and just all the energy I had built up. It was like, just don't be that kid on the first day of practice that ruins the drill. So I get down on my stance, and I'm just thinking, it's on 2, it's on 2, it's on 2. And then the next thing I know, I hear a loud crunch, and then my head hits the ground, and all my teammates and coaches start laughing. And as I laid there, tears started to come into my eyes. And next thing I knew, I was filled with rage. And I knew that I had to do whatever I could to, quote unquote, get my payback. And so they tried to move on to the next drill, or they tried to move on to the next pair of people that were gonna go. I got up, I pulled that kid that was in front of me, told him to get out of the drill, and I looked at my coach dead in the eye and I was like, we're going again. So I got down on my stance and I told the same other 2 dudes, hey, come back, we're going again. I got down on my stance and I remember hearing my coach off to the side and he said, it's on 2 again. And as he said that, I dug my foot into the ground and to myself, I was like, I don't care what you just said, I'm going on the first sound I hear. And I did. I bit down on my mouthpiece, dug my heels in, and on the first syllable of a word, I just took off. And I drove both of them back. One kid fell down, and I drove the other kid out of the circle. And I was swarmed and celebrated by my coaches and teammates. And I remember that feeling, and I remember thinking to myself, this is what I thought football would feel like. I didn't think that football was going to be that me on my back, tears in my eyes, feeling betrayed. Because that version of myself, I couldn't help but wonder, oh, if my parents were here at this practice, would that have happened? Would they have taken advantage of me like that? Because as a kid, I needed to know all of the rules, everything that needed to happen before doing it, because I needed to make sure I didn't mess up. Because up until that point in my life, when I messed up, bad things happened. Whether I was abused, whether I messed up with a foster parent and they sent me to a different home, messing up in my life had serious consequences. So I needed to know all the answers. I needed to know everything before I took the first step. But in that environment, that wasn't accepted. I was laughed at. I felt vulnerable and betrayed. And so I shut the world out, took matters into my own hands, forced them to do the drill again, and then I was received. Then I felt like I belonged. And so that is how I showed up on the competitive field. I showed up as an individual, committed to working really hard and trying my best, but I'll be danged if I care about what happens to other people around me. Whether the person lined up against me, whether it was my teammate standing beside me. Because I felt like if I worried about other people and I didn't do what I needed to do, they wouldn't treat me the same way. I wouldn't get the same respect or the same response. And so I showed up that way, and I got in trouble in sport, in classroom, in a lot of different ways because I showed up with that same mindset. And the reality is, I didn't have those three things when I was on the ground on my back. I didn't feel connected to the group or community of people. I didn't feel like they had positive regard for what happened to me. I didn't feel like they knew me. So I was going to take things into my own hands. I didn't feel like I was important until I won the drill. I didn't feel like I had value until I knocked the kid back. I didn't feel like I had any value to our team until I won that rep and showed them something different than that first rep. And so there is so much about life that we are treated based on our ability. We are treated based on what we are able to do in the moment. And when you are a child navigating foster care, it's hard to deal with the consequences of decisions in the moment and the decisions of the people around you. Because I didn't choose to be in foster care. I didn't choose to not be with my biological family. I didn't choose to not be connected to the number one source of belonging that any person can have. But here I am. And now I'm dealing with the consequences of people's decisions, of my own decisions, because of what happened early on in life. You see, I lacked belonging at every major step of the way. My first childhood memory is literally me being taken out of the arms of my own mom. Of my social worker coming to the door, giving my mom an ultimatum of if she opens up, we can do it the easy way or the hard way, and being physically taken out of the arms of my mom. Then I remember sitting in the car as we drove by the front lawn and my mom being restrained by police officers as I'm being taken away. I remember sitting in that passenger seat and my caseworker didn't say a single word. Didn't ask me how I was doing. Didn't ask me or didn't step into a conversation to communicate any matter of importance or value at all. After they took me from my mom when I was 4 years old at that point, I went to a crisis nursery that first night. The first foster home I eventually ended up in, I ran away from. 4 years old. In central Illinois in November, middle of November, with no shoes or socks on, no coat, no pants, just a shirt and some shorts. They found me at 5 a.m. in the morning. The police report, I don't remember this, the police report that I now have in my possession said that when they questioned me and asked what I was doing, I told them I was trying to find my way back home to my mom. I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I had the same value, matter, or importance, and I wanted everything in my being to be back with my family. Within that first year and a half of being in foster care, at that point, I stayed in over 10 different foster homes. That led me to a point at 6 years old, I moved into a foster home with my two biological sisters for the first time. We were reunited, but then immediately started being physically abused by my foster parent. Now, I had never experienced stability in my life. The only stability that I experienced was at 6 years old when I ended up staying with my abuser for almost 6 years. Ran away multiple times, tried to do whatever we could to get out of the home of our abuser, but with no luck. What do you think that communicated to me about my belonging? What do you think that communicated to me about my worth and how much I mattered and how much value I had or didn't have? It didn't matter if people, teachers, well-meaning individuals just complimented me about how good of a student I was or how good at math, my times tables I was. Like, it didn't matter. When I was 11, I got back, or 11, we ran away. Me and my sister, she was 14, I was 11. We were gone for over a month on our own. Stayed anywhere we could. The last week or so, we stayed in public parks and we stayed under bridges. And after realizing we weren't going to be able to continue that way, we turned ourselves in. Luckily, a police officer listened to us. Luckily, a police officer asked us questions, brought us down to the precinct, and investigated our claims and everything that we said and shared for 12 hours. It got us out of the home, got my sister's adoptions terminated, and before I knew it, we were split up. Now, within a year, I'm back with my biological dad. And surely, now things should get better, right? Everything in my life, this is the moment I've been waiting for. Here it goes. And then I start to get in trouble at school. We start to fall below the poverty line. We don't have heat or electricity in the winter. And then in my 8th grade year, after we moved up to Hudson, halfway through it, we were homeless. Living out of a car, living on people's couches when we could, staying in the motel right off 94. Because of my experience, because of the lack of belief that other people cared, had any sort of understanding about what I might be going through or would do anything about it, I didn't tell anyone. I did everything I could to try to maintain this facade that I was okay, that it would all be good. Spent half of my 8th grade year homeless, didn't tell a single soul. We ended up moving to Somerset to try to find a place to live. And then that first year, we bounced around a ton. We stayed above a dance studio. We stayed in the back of a bar. We rented a single bedroom out of the home of a stranger down the street. Again, what is this communicating to me about how I belong? When I was a sophomore, we finally kind of got stable, and then my dad got arrested. And I remember they called me down to the office. I walk in, it's the superintendent, principal, AD, football coach, basketball coach, all 3 school counselors. And I was like, man, I made a really bad joke today. I got in some serious trouble. And genuinely, I had not seen my dad for 4 days up until that point. Genuinely did not register that they were bringing me down to talk about my dad. Because I got so good at compartmentalizing what people knew about me, what was happening, and them even caring about it, I literally thought I got in trouble for a joke I made in class that day. Then they asked me, Gaelin, have you talked to your dad? Immediately, without thinking about it, yep, saw him this morning. They were like, we know that's not true. We just got a call. Your dad's arrested. We need to figure out what we're going to do. I blacked out. Don't remember anything else they said to me. I just remember counting down the seconds until they would let me out. Because I made up in my mind in that room, in that conference room, that as soon as I leave this room, I'm getting my stuff, and I'm walking out of school. I'm going to drop out. I'm tired of trusting and believing that someone is going to show up for me. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to show up for myself. I'm going to drop out. I'll get my GED. I'll make it. I'll be fine. As a honor roll student, as a starter, 2-year starter on football and basketball, I was ready to throw everything away because I was tired of believing that someone else would care. Now, that's the depressing stuff. That's the sad stuff. But that's the reality that a lot of foster youth in our community are facing. Believing that there's no one out there that cares. There's no one out there that wants what's best for me, that even will bat an eye at the things that I have to navigate every single day. Luckily, I found belonging through different relationships throughout my life. That all culminated in, as I walked out of that office that day, I remember it was lunchtime, and if you've been in a high school, and I don't think this is just a Western Wisconsin thing, if you've been in a high school during lunch, you know all the boys are sprinting through the hallway, like full-blown track relay sprint to get to the front of the lunch line. And I remember watching a couple of my classmates sprint and get into the front of the line, and then I just broke down with emotion. Because I knew, walking out of that office, that I was literally going to throw my future away. I knew that the years that I endured to be at that moment, it was all for nothing. Because every time I felt like we were finally making ground to my future, to not struggling, to be in relationship, to not be alone anymore, I felt like it was all for nothing. Because I knew what I was going to do was the end of it all. And so before I collected myself to stand up and go to my locker, get my things and walk out, my high school football coach put his arm on my shoulder. And I didn't want to look at him. I wanted to hide the tears that were flowing at this point. And I just remember him saying, "Gaelin, I can't imagine what you're feeling right now. And I don't have all the answers. But I want you to come live with us until we figure it out." It's a really cool gesture, right? Really admirable, really just selfless. Even still, my immediate response was no. My immediate response was no, thank you. The most generous thing that anyone could have ever done in my life up until that point, no, thank you. You know why? Because I had put my hope in too many people up until that point. I had no more chances to give someone else, to take care, to value my life, to give me an opportunity to achieve and obtain the things that I thought I was worthy of. And so I was like, no, thank you. It's polite, it's generous, but I'm gonna move into your house. I'll be there maybe till the end of basketball season, and then I'm gonna be shipped out into a different town, be in a different foster home, and I'm just gonna have to run away from them. And so I went to my locker to get my stuff and literally still walk out of school. And then my counselors caught me at my locker. And the first thing they said was like, "Gaelin, we don't want you to go back to class. We want you to come to our office so we can talk." And I was like, okay, good. I don't want to go back to class either. I want to walk out of here. Like, we're on the same page. We just got to fix the last part of what you're talking about. And they eventually, they stay with me for the most part. And I'm like, people, just leave me alone. Like, let me go. And I end up going to their office, and I sat there in silence for the rest of the day. They asked me questions. They poked and prodded. And the best that I could, I told them, like, as politely as I could, I told them, get away from me. I was going to say something else, but as politely as I could, I was like, no, thank you, again. And so, little old me, at the end of the day, when the bell rang, I tried to hide in the hallway amongst my peers, because most high schoolers are not 6'4". And so I started to creep down in the hallway to try to sneak out of the front, and so I could go home, get my stuff, and then be on my way. And parked out front was Bruce Larson. Door open, the student driver door, get on in, let's go get your stuff. So I move in, and this isn't the sole moment that changed everything in my life, but it was one of the moments that everything else made sense. And so the reason we're here is I believe I found belonging through a couple different relationships, a couple different points. But it wasn't until I had time to really process what people were trying to do in my life that I was able to accept and receive the help people are willing to offer. So for you, you might have relationship, you might have a touch point with the foster care community or the foster system in some way, and there might be someone on your mind as I'm talking about this who has rejected your help, who has said thank you, but no thank you, as you've tried to provide belonging for them. And I'm telling you, the only reason that I was even able to receive it is because they stuck around long enough for me to understand what they were offering. Because when you are going through hard things and challenging things and living in survival mode, you're not trying to take the energy or time to process what is good and what is bad for me. You just say no to it all and try to do life the only way you know how, which is survive. And so I am only here because of these 4 characteristics that people in various points of my life showed up in these meaningful ways. And so the C in this acronym, the C in the CARE model, the CARE acronym that I talk about anywhere I get a chance to, is compassion. If we want to provide belonging, if we want to communicate to someone who historically has felt lack of belonging, we have to start with compassion. Now, compassion is not empathy. We like to be empathetic. We like to give people our wishes and our best wishes and our prayers, but that's not compassion. Compassion is kind of those same feelings that drive you into action on behalf of someone else. so you can alleviate the things that they might be experiencing. And so an example of compassion for me, as I started to really accept and think about the relationships in my life of people who cared, who made a difference, one story that came to mind was me when I was in fourth grade and I was 10 years old. I was living in the abusive foster home and I had overslept one day and missed the bus. Now, you might think that's a harmless situation, but for a kid that's living in an abusive home, that was the worst case scenario. One, because I would not get to go to school and get away from my abuser for 10 hours in a day when I was planning on that the night before. Like, yeah, I can prepare for weekends. I can prepare for not being around my friends in this extended contact period with my abuser, but to be home on a day that I should be at school was devastating. And so there was a time when I was 10 that I overslept and missed the bus. And instead of going upstairs to tell my foster parent that I overslept and missed the bus and to just get abused, I decided that I was going to walk to school. And so I snuck out, my big old backpack, little fourth grader with a big head, snuck out of the house and started walking my bus route. Now, this was not a time where fourth graders had smartphones. So if you are a young kid in here and you have a smartphone, you should thank your parent. But this is not a time when fourth graders had smartphones. This wasn't even a time where we had smartphones or Google or Apple Maps. If you wanted to find directions to go somewhere, it had to be Maps Quest. So you had to go into the computer room and get on dial-up and then print off the instructions of how you can get to where you're trying to go. It is not something you're willing to do if you're trying to sneak out of a house. It's not conducive to that. And so I left the house and walked my bus route because it was the only thing I knew. And if you know anything about bus routes, you know that they are not the fastest way from point A to point B. If anything, it's the opposite. I left the house a little bit after 9 o'clock that morning, knowing if I got to school before 12:30, I would beat the inexcused absence attendance check. Now, I knew there was a 12:30 inexcused absence attendance check because I spent a lot of time in the office, but we don't need to talk about that. That's not important. What's important is I knew 12:30 and I knew that they went alphabetically. And so I had a little bit of extra time because my last name was Elmore, but I couldn't walk slow. So I was moving. And I left the house a little after 9 that morning, and I got to school roughly 10 minutes before the 3 o'clock bell. It had taken me almost 6 hours to walk to school. I since looked up the distance that I walked, and it was almost 6 miles, straight shot. I don't even know what it would be if I walked my bus route. I get to school, quickly realized I did not make the attendance check, realized that the police had been out looking for me for the last 2.5 hours, and that literally everyone in the school knew I was missing. And obviously that meant my foster parent knew that I was missing. I got on the bus and went home to one of the worst encounters I had with my foster parent. That encounter was one of the reasons why I ran away shortly after that. But what I found out later was the reason the police were out looking for me was not because they were upset that I was missing. The police were looking for me because I had a teacher who years prior I had confided in saying that I was being abused. And when she realized that I wasn't at school and that my foster parents said I wasn't at home, she called the police on her own. She called the police even though her principal and people above her said don't do it, because she was concerned about what might have happened to me. And when I got to school that day that I walked my bus route, when I walked into the office, I was rushed by every teacher. They hugged me. Some of them were kissing me on the head. Some had tears flowing down their face. And one, it's weird to experience affection from your teachers. But two, there were teachers in this group that I swore did not like me. Like, you sent me to the office last week. Like, don't act like we're all buddy-buddy now. But what was communicated in that moment, when I realized like every lead teacher in the school was in the office because I was missing, there was something different that was communicated to me about belonging. The fact that you would turn over your classroom because, and I'm not even in it, But to turn over your classroom because I was missing, that communicated belonging to me. That communicated love, compassion in a different way. There were people who were willing to change their day. Their day was ruined because I was not where I was supposed to be. That communicates a need for positive regard. That experience has always stuck with me. I experienced compassion in a new way, so much so that it didn't matter that I was going to get abused when I got home. Because I knew legally I had to come to school the next day. Or when school was back in session, I had to be there. So I knew regardless, if I woke up on time and I got to the bus stop when I needed to, that I would be able to experience that belonging. That I would be able to experience that regard that my teachers had for me. That I would be able to experience that connection. That I would be able to experience belonging. And so the A in this acronym is authenticity. Authenticity refers to the legitimacy of something, or to be real about what you can do, what is available to you to make a difference. The story that comes to mind always when I think about and talk about authenticity is the story of my janitor in my elementary school. Her name was Miss Peanut. Now, she was Miss Peanut because she was about 4 foot tall. She had to be the world's shortest janitor. I'll give her that. But everyone loved her. And our society doesn't really think of a janitor role as something that's important or that has worth or status, right? No one grows up wanting to be a janitor. But there was something about Miss Peanut that was so unique that everyone loved her because of the way that she saw individuals as they were. Miss Peanut never promised to adopt me. She never promised to change my life or get me out of the circumstances that I was in. All she would do was things that were available to her in her unique role. So if I was at lunch and I had a lot of food that I physically could not eat, that would make me sick if I tried to eat it. If I was in the lunchroom and there was something for free and reduced lunch that day that I wouldn't eat, she would go in the back and call in a favor with the lunch ladies and bring me food. Bring me something from the cart where you could buy a Pop-Tart or you could buy something that tastes better than the normal lunch menu. And she would go in there and she would bring it to me. If I was in the office because I had gotten in trouble, which we talked about, I did a couple times. If I was in the office and she was walking through, she would always stop and talk to me. Not, what did you do? Not, why are you in here again? But, hey, Gaelin, how are you doing? What's going on today? How can I help? And so there was something about her that she will always be ingrained in my memory because she never overpromised and underdelivered. She always did what was authentic to her. And that was in such stark contrast with all the other primary relationships in my life. My social workers, when they placed me in a new home, always were like, this one is going to be good. This is the one that's going to work out. And it wouldn't. Every time I went on a visit with my parents, we're going to come get you soon. We're all going to be home in a family together before your birthday or before Christmas. And it wouldn't happen. Every major and primary role or relationship in my life, they overpromised and underdelivered. Even friends. I had friends, really close people that I grew up with. Their parents would tell me, Gaelin, we're going to get licensed and we're going to get you. And it would never happen. And so there was something so pure, so impactful and empowering about the authenticity that Miss Peanut showed. She was never going to say that she could do more, or she would never act like she couldn't do what she was capable of. She was always committed to being authentic. As we are having this conversation, I'm not just solely talking about relationships or roles that people played in my life, but I'm talking to you now. What ways can you be compassionate? What ways can your community or the people that you know be more compassionate for those that might experience similar things that I do or did? What ways can you be authentic to what's available to you? The ways, the skills, the abilities, the the rooms in your home, the ways that you can serve somebody that needs to experience belonging. This isn't just me talking about my story now. This is us having a conversation. What does compassion look like in your life? What does authenticity look like in your life, in your friend's life, in your siblings' life, in your community's life? The R is resilience. Resilience is referring to the ability to bounce back after adversity, change, or misfortune. It actually talks about, it originally refers to a rubber band. So if I were to have a rubber band and I pulled it and stretched it and stretched it and let go and it snapped back into its original form, that rubber band would be resilient. Now, there are sometimes you pull a rubber band and it might snap. That's where self-care and days off come in, right? Because we need that sometimes. But I'm not talking about resilience for the kids that we are envisioning and imagining today. Because we talk about resilience way too much when it pertains to them, when it pertained to me. If I had $1 for every time that someone called me resilient in my childhood, I'd have a lot more money. It really started to not have meaning anymore. Because you tell me that I'm resilient, but I still don't feel like I belong. You tell me I'm resilient, but I still don't have a family. You tell me I'm resilient, and I still don't feel like I have a place where I can be me, that is home. And so we are talking about resilience as it pertains to you. What ways can you continue to show up in the face of adversity and misfortune and change? We've had a lot of change in the last couple of years. Life will forever be different. But how can we be resilient regardless? Don talked about the unique numbers that are facing this county. How can we be resilient in a way that the kids that are in those situations aren't on the receiving end of adversity, of people not being able to step in and make a difference? The story that comes to mind and that I want to share with you about resilience is related and pertaining to my high school counselors. Now, I told you that first day that they wanted to talk to me, I didn't say a word. And that didn't change for a long time. They literally changed my class schedule, guys. They changed my class schedule, so 8th hour every day I would come down to their office and we would talk. And once I realized they changed my schedule to do this, I started to try to concoct ways that I could step on their toes, push their buttons to push them away. Like if it was up to me, I'm doing anything and everything I can short of getting in serious trouble to make sure that they don't want to look at me or talk to me again. Because it was like pulling teeth to sit in there and get asked questions about what I experienced. And so I pushed every single button I could. I looked up and researched how much they made and tried to make fun of their salaries. I tried to make fun of the schools they went to. I did everything I could to try to step on their toes, push them away. And when I tell you, I was good at this in foster homes. I was really good at pushing buttons. That's why I know I moved to a lot of different homes, because I pushed people away and I got really good at it. These were two of the first people that it wasn't working on. And they continued to show up. And I would swore that, man, yesterday at the end of the day, they wouldn't look at me. And I'd come into school the next day like, yes, I'm going to have my 8th hour back to me. And they'd scream across the corridor, hey, Gaelin, can't wait to see you later. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And then it continued. My junior year came. Get my schedule at the beginning of the school year. Oh my gosh, I'm with them again? Like, clearly I have to be short credits or something if you're going to keep doing this to me. And so my junior year, we met for an hour every single day. And they continued to show up. They continued to not be impacted, to not be swayed by me pushing buttons. They would snap back to form every single time. Then there was a day, and I guess you could call it a breakthrough. They asked me a question, and they framed it in a way I had not really considered or thought about before. And I answered it. And when I answered it, I was confused. I was like, that wasn't that scary. And then they asked a follow-up question on my answer. And then before I know it, before I knew it, we were in a full-blown conversation about my past and history. And then we continued to meet, and I continued to process stuff. And they continued to break down the walls, the barriers that I had put up my whole life. And I started to have real conversations about the things that I experienced and that happened to me. Started to learn about what attachment disorder was. Started to learn about this thing called trauma. Started to learn about the things I think about, the things that are my biggest fears in life are not my fault, just the result of the things that I navigated as a child. For the first time in my life, I'm able to disassociate everything that is wrong with me, everything that I experienced in my life from my individual worth. Only because some people continued to show up every single day. Some people continued to reject my rejection of them and say, we're going to be here no matter what. Those two relationships, those two people played an incredible role in my healing, my own individual belief in my own individual belonging. The last one is empowerment. And all of them are equally important. But empowerment is kind of the perfect bow on this whole thing. Because if you're compassionate, if you're authentic, if you're resilient, and you're not empowering the person you're serving, the people, you're not equipping them with what they need to be successful, then what are we doing? If we're not preparing people for a day that you're no longer around, then what does it all make sense for? If they have to be dependent and rely on you for everything in their life, for everything good that they might experience, then what are we doing? And so empowerment is the thing that allows us to transform and transcend the bad things that someone might experience. It prepares them for the future. It's teaching them how to drive and then giving them the keys so that they can do it in a safe environment. We don't just do driver's ed and then send people off to the road like, all right, figure it out. We teach them, and then we coach them and empower them so that they can do it when we're no longer around. And so empowerment is extremely important, and the most empowering person I've ever met in my life was Bruce Larson, was my high school football coach. And he did it in so many ways, and a lot of the time it didn't make me feel good about myself, but it was true. And it was what I needed to hear in that moment. And so there was a time when I was living in their home, and really up until that point, I tell people I didn't feel like I was a part of their family yet. I felt like I was renting a room out in their home. Like I was a tenant. Because I wasn't willing to connect. I wasn't willing to let anybody in. I wasn't willing to have serious conversations. And I would just spend most of my time in my room. And so there was one night I came down in the middle of the night to get a snack. I was going in to get some Cheetos. And Bruce didn't sleep well either. And I was a terrible sleeper. And he told me, hey, Gaelin, come in here and sit with me for a sec. And I sat down, and we were just both watching a rerun of SportsCenter. And he eventually broke the silence, and he just said, Gaelin, I'm not trying to be your dad. I'm not trying to make you do or be anything that you don't want to be. But I am just trying to give you a break that you haven't gotten yet. And whatever you need, how much ever time, I'm going to be here. And I don't think I responded. I think if anything, my response was, okay, thank you. But internally, that was the first time someone was that honest with me. And that was the first time someone basically told me, if I'm going to do anything in my life, with my life, it was going to be up to me. But at the same time, saying, hey, I'm going to be here with you as you figure it out. And there was this calm that came over my body in that exchange. And I just remember thinking, I was like, okay, whatever you need from me, I'll do it. And that's when the bond really started to grow. That's when I really started to trust and listen and do anything and everything he asked of me. Because I knew he would be able to help me get to where I wanted to go. And so as he empowered me, I accepted the challenge, and I was ready to seize and attack anything and everything I could get an opportunity to seize and attack. And that was the beginning of this journey of committing to my athletic ability and experiencing the freedom that a sport might be able to give me. To be able to go to college, be the first male in the history of my family to graduate on time from high school. To be the first one to go to college, and let alone not just go to college, but go to college for free. And at that time, like, because I was on scholarship, I was getting paid to go to school. It opened up doors that I never saw possible for myself. And so this is what we get a chance to do. We get a chance to provide belonging through caring for people. We get a chance through our compassion, through our authenticity, through our resilience and empowering of other people. We get a chance to provide something, to expose them to something that they may not have had exposure to up until that point in life. That maybe every single person, every single counterpart or peer has had consistent access to. Belonging. And so as you sit here, there might be people coming to mind that should be here tonight, that were maybe going to come but didn't because of the weather. But we have a chance to continue to care in our communities, in our schools, on our teams, sports teams, in the classrooms of your children, all across the board, so that belonging is experienced and potential is unleashed. Because the football player, the person, the Gaelin that got to be in the NFL, the one that graduated high school or college early, the one that is doing this right now is not here, if not for the people in my life that were committed to me experiencing belonging, whether they knew it or not. And so we often think that this work is, or this commitment is just a one-on-one kind of commitment, that it's a one-to-one impact. But the reality is, this is bigger than one individual. It's bigger than one person's life. It's bigger than one relationship. If anything, it's generational work that we're talking about. And this is the generational work. This is my family that I get to experience the purest form of belonging that I could ever imagine. This is a family that I dreamed about as an 8-year-old being abused, that when I get older, I'll get to experience that. This is the same stuff as I sat waiting for my parent to show up at a visitation that they never showed up to, thinking, man, if I have children, I would never treat them this way. This is possible because people just like you said yes to being a difference, to being the difference. And it varied in roles. I didn't just tell you about the Larson family, who I love to death. I told you about Miss Peanut. I told you about a teacher in elementary school. I told you about counselors. The one way that we can make there's not just one way we can make a difference. There's not just one avenue or role that is needed to be filled in order to change lives. There's so many. And the reason I like to close here is because there are things that my girls will never experience because of the investment other people put into me. The cycle in my family of drug addiction, of alcohol abuse, of physical abuse, of domestic violence, of having criminal records, it stopped there because of the people willing to step up to the plate. Because of people saying yes to being the difference. Now, when we opened our time tonight, I brought up the statistic that we get a chance to make 35 decisions in one day. What would our communities look like if one of those decisions was to be the difference? Thank you. Do you want me to say it?
Sure.
Okay. I'll be your bodyguard.
There we go. I don't know how I can follow that, but I'll try with some information. We were a little selfish with our intention tonight. We wanted this to be an informational event, obviously, but we also wanted to pull on some heartstrings and hopefully inspire others to also ask, how can I be the difference? What can I do to help youth in foster care? There's a QR code up on the screen. If you're not familiar with that, ask somebody under the age of 20, and they probably can tell you how to navigate a QR code. That'll take you to a page where you can just put your name, email, phone number, and one of our foster care team will contact you with more information. So the question, how can you help? How can you help make the difference? First and foremost, when I talked about 100 kids in foster care, we need foster parents. Any of the foster parents in this room would probably nod their head in enthusiasm and say, yes, we need more foster parents, because we ask a lot of our foster parents. We're constantly calling and saying, do you have room for one more at your table? So we need foster parents. We also need people who are willing, as Gaelin talked about, the rubber band, the resilience. Sometimes you need to have self-care, you need to have a break. We need respite providers. Respite providers are, sometimes people aren't ready to make a commitment to fostering, and that's okay. It might not be the right time in your life right now, but we also have a huge demand for respite care providers. So individuals who are willing to have kids come into their home for short periods of time, maybe a weekend, maybe a couple of days when the foster parent is not available, or may need to have that self-care break, or whatever the case may be. If you're in the audience and you are connected to a business somehow, oftentimes people say, well, how can a business help support kids in foster care? We have a bakery in town here that is very supportive of our foster care program. They allow kids in care to come in and design birthday cake, and they create phenomenal birthday cakes for these kids free of charge. They want them to have kind of that special experience with their birthday. We have received monetary donations before, and we've used that purely for the needs of foster kids and foster parents. We recently had to place some kids in a home, and we're calling foster parents at 4:00 in the afternoon saying, can you take a couple kids? We would love to be able to say, hey, we want you to welcome these kids, make them feel comfortable, not worry about what you have to make for dinner that night. So if we get monetary donations, we can do things like purchasing gift cards for restaurants in their local communities so that they can order up food, or they can go pick up a pizza and not have to worry about making dinner, but can worry about focusing on what that child may need, help them feel belonging. We have a representative here, Sean, in the back. He is with our CASA program, Court-Appointed Special Advocates. It's a newer program in our area, and it seeks volunteers that want to help make a difference as well. And he can give more information. Kind of a snapshot of that is it's volunteers who go through a pretty significant amount of training, and they are kind of an advocate, and they get to know children who are placed in foster care, and they help to make sure that their voice is heard through their experience and through the court process and through their involvement in that system when they're placed out of home care. So he would be available to answer questions. We're kind of in the works. We're not sure how this will look exactly, but we're trying to put some avenues together for people who want to maybe do something as simple as help with transportation. We have kids in foster care who, as Gaelin talked about, having visitations with their parents. And it's logistics sometimes of getting a child from point A to point B and maybe back to the foster home after the visit. And a lot of times we're asking foster parents to do that where we have limited resources. So even if it's something as simple as if there's a way that we can make it work, that we have volunteer drivers to help with transportation of kids, we're working on that. So that's another way you can help. There's lots of opportunities. There's probably a lot that we're not thinking of or that you might have ideas on, and that's where talk to us, reach out to us, let us know, let's brainstorm. Again, I think one of the things that we can say about St. Croix County is we're pretty innovative. So if there's an opportunity, if there's a need and we can make it work, we'll try our hardest to do so. We have kind of some next steps. In addition to the QR code, there's some little QR cards out on the table. If you know somebody maybe that wanted to come tonight, that couldn't come tonight, that you think, boy, I think they'd be a great individual or they have a resource that they could share, take a card, give it to them. They can send their information to us. River Channel is recording the presentation tonight, and that'll be available after about a week, I think, Nate. If you Google YouTube and River Channel, it's the Hudson Community Access Station. You'll be able to see the recording of this. So if you know somebody who you think might benefit from watching it, or you think that our message was so inspiring, you want to watch it again, you can access it there. Please share that. We're going to have, we have cookies out there. We want people to mingle, ask questions. Ben, can you raise your hand in the back? Ben Tomando is one of our foster care coordinators. We have another foster care coordinator that stepped out. She'll be here. So if you see somebody with a shirt, they're usually connected to our foster care program somehow. Just grab us, ask some questions. We have a couple of, there's a flyer on the table as well. We have a couple of opportunities if people want to get more information, like, boy, what would it really take, or what's involved in the licensing process? Like, how does that work? How long does it take? What do I have to do? We have a couple of virtual meetings set up and another in-person meeting for those that maybe want to get more information about next steps. Maybe somebody couldn't be here tonight and they just want to touch base and get more information on how to be involved in the foster care system. Those opportunities are there, so grab a flyer. There's some other little gadgets out there. Grab what you need and ask questions. And most importantly, think about the questions that Gaelin asked. You know, how can we help be resilient? How can we help be authentic? How can we help show up for kids in our community? We want to have more stories like Gaelin's and have those positive outcomes and be able to stop some of those generational challenges for folks. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time and listening, and please stick around, grab a cookie, talk, ask questions. We appreciate it. Thank you.